Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Sully. With most Clint Eastwood directed films that are autobiographical, and especially the Clint Eastwood films recently in the 2010s or whatever decade we're in, are usually films that try to take on things that they just really can't handle or are not really built for. So Sully is actually surprising because it takes on its subject matter rather well, and that's kind of surprising, especially considering that the main big part of this movie is, I think, 208 seconds, as they say. It wasn't very long, or 200 some seconds. It's not a lot of, they're talking about seconds, so clearly this is not a very long sequence, and they actually make a full movie out of it, and I think that works far better for Clint Eastwood's skills as a director and as a storyteller, is that they can really focus on this one event and tell the story of this event and Sully Sullenberger in this film, played by Tom Hanks. It works so much better, I think, because he's not trying to shove in all this biographical information that's too much for a certain movie. American Sniper should have chosen either to be a war movie or a story about PTSD, but trying to do both, it just wasn't made for that. That might have been that person's story, and I'm not really, criticizing that person that the film is based on, but what I am saying is the film isn't built to handle both of those things. Sully is built in the correct way to handle everything you probably want to say with this film, with that character, with this event, and in a lot of ways it's a real return to form for Clint Eastwood, or really I guess not return to form, but him actually understanding how to use his form and the kind of films he's been making over the past 6 years that haven't really been as successful as Sully is, being a very watchable, entertaining movie, but in the Clint Eastwood way that he only did really one take of everything, doesn't really care and labor over it as much as most big Hollywood directors, and you can honestly tell that it shows through his laziness in almost an anti-art way that, someone who wants to read too much into Hollywood blockbusters when there isn't really much there could act like there's anti-art going on, but I don't know if not giving a shit is really like anti-art or just not giving a shit. But regardless of all that, Sully seems to be able to get away with that somehow and make a very enjoyable, very watchable biographical film that I didn't really feel like Clint Eastwood could get away with anymore. What is called the Miracle on the Hudson, where Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger and the first officer, Jeffrey Sykes, on a U.S. Airways flight took off, and after 3 minutes into their flight, they hit a bunch of Canadian geese that get into the engines, and both engines fail, and they have to find a way to land and not crash into one of the most densely populated areas, at least in America, and they're worried that if they could crash the plane, it would be devastation everywhere, so they try to land at an airport, but it's not going to work. So Sully Sullenberger decides to land the plane in the Hudson and saves everyone on board, and actually everyone survives and gets out of the plane safely, even though they landed in the water. But then there is a big investigation through the transportation committee and finding out exactly what happened, and very critical of Sully Sullenberger. And most of the film isn't about the awesome thing where he saves a bunch of people and everybody lives. It's really about the investigation on just figuring out what actually happened on the flight and whether it was warranted and the best action he could have taken to land the plane in the Hudson River. The thing with Clint Eastwood's direction, and he's very known for this, and I'm not reading too much into it because it shows, is that he's known for doing kind of one take and not much else as an actor and as a director, and it's why he is able to make so many movies. He makes a lot of movies, sometimes 2 a year, sometimes 1 a year. It's been a little bit, this is his first film, I believe, since American Sniper, right? I think the thing with Sully and really Clint Eastwood's direction in general is he makes films fast, but not in a way that has that kind of young director energy about it. It's more in that older director way, is I know how to do this simply and as fast as possible and as lean as possible. And there's certain studio directors back in the day of classic Hollywood who could do that very effectively, and probably some that Clint Eastwood got to see actually do that. Clint Eastwood is just not really as accomplished as a filmmaker. He somehow gets good actors to work for him, that I don't understand, but he always kind of manages to do it. It never feels like he labors on it as much. This script very much feels like a first draft where they basically just get everything they need and, you know, punch up a lot later. A lot of the performances feel like they should be worked on. There isn't much personality through them. It just feels like everybody's kind of bummed out because of this investigation and they're famous and Sully's not sure how to process fame and things. And they don't have a lot of fun with the subject matter. They don't have a lot of fun with it. It's just very matter of fact and serious, and people just did their jobs, and that's why it was so wonderful that they got everyone out, because if you just do your job and know how to do your job, you can do amazing things. But his lean direction in this feels like more just kind of a well-made TV movie of the early 2000s before the quote-unquote golden age of TV, the kind of thing that we get lots of Emmy nominations and be a big television event, but then if you saw the TV movie replayed later, you're like, oh man, this is like what everyone kind of cared about. And it feels like that. It also feels like kind of a big studio biopic from the 50s or something, like the Jimmy Stewart movie about Lindbergh, but a lot less accomplished. It doesn't feel like it is having fun with its subject matter. It feels like it's about its subject matter, which is often a problem with Clint Eastwood when he's covering real life people. He's almost too into them. Like, he cares more about kind of weird articles popping up about how he forgot about one small dumbass detail, which is what too many biopics care about, and how they're written, they feel like that. They don't care as much about the flow of the story, and he doesn't, but it kind of works for it in ways that most of these things don't work as well. Like Rush, I think, is an example of this kind of style working well, but Rush is actually entertaining and more thrilling and interesting. Sully isn't those things. Sully kind of washes over you. It's inoffensive in a very watchable way. It's actually, believe it or not, kind of a airplane movie, in that you could watch it on a plane and you'd let it wash over you. It killed its hour-and-a-half running time fairly well, and then you can move on with your flight and watch another forgettable movie that you'd never in your right mind pay for, but it's free right there and you're stuck on a plane inside. I don't think this would actually play on a plane, because I'm pretty sure they don't let like plane crash movies to watch on planes, even though this is fairly optimistic and everyone survived. And they even say in one part, when the committee is talking to Sully, say this is the only time they've investigated a crash, and they're actually talking to the living pilot after the crash happened, which extra shows you how fucking remarkable it was that this happened. Plays in that way like a forgettable kind of TV movie that kind of washes over you. It's just actually good at it. That doesn't say much about Clint Eastwood and his direction. It shouldn't. It kind of just works in spite of all that. Like a lot of later or recent Clint Eastwood movies, he can rely on a good performance. And in this, Tom Hanks really works with it, but it's lesser Tom Hanks in a drama. And I think with something like, you know, the drama stuff he did with Saving Private Ryan with Spielberg, or Bridge of Spies with Spielberg, and then you look at Captain Phillips, which is actually another real life story Tom Hanks was in, which also the real life story took place in 2009, and then that got made into a movie, and this is another 2009 story that got made into a movie. I don't think he really knew how to use Tom Hanks as well and give him enough time. There's certain times Tom Hanks' personality clearly comes through. Other actors who are in this, like Anna Gunn from Breaking Bad, Mike O'Malley, Aaron Eckhart, Laura Linney, are completely wasted in this film. It's like, especially Anna Gunn, who's like, I don't know why she was in this. It's like it could have been literally anyone, and that happens too often in this film. And Tom Hanks seems to get it to work, but he's being too sad and mopey, and it feels like Clint Eastwood doesn't really entirely know what to do with it. And it really doesn't even get the Sully Sullenberger type of personality and the kind of good guy kind of personality we're used to even from Tom Hanks. It's just more about him being all mopey and stuff, and, you know, being totally bummed out by this like investigation, which apparently in real life Sully Sullenberger found it really unnecessary. It's like he's playing the story in such a straight, boring way, and he's not having fun with the actors. I like Unforgiven. There's certain films that Clint Eastwood has directed I like even $1 Million Baby, and I wasn't a huge Mystic River person, but I've never loved how he tackles story, and it feels like he's getting worse and worse as he goes on. But this is kind of like a late director movie, and directors' later works are never as good, and usually some of their worst films, and I think all that kind of works within this film. Even what he does with the actual plane landing on the Hudson, or crashing, or whatever you want to call it, they show it from many different times, from the passengers, from just the cockpit, but it doesn't feel like he's having fun with like different perspectives. Like you could say, oh, well, let's have a perspective from the cockpit, and let's see what these guys are doing, how they view it, and have it in more of a matter-of-fact way, but see it from the passenger's perspective and how it's different. It almost feels like through the different things, we're almost seeing different cuts of the same thing, and it would be maybe more interesting to do, not necessarily a Rashomon thing, but you could do something like that, or play with perspective or something along those lines. But it's like Eastwood doesn't really want to get into that artsy-fartsy crap and just wants to present it so straight. It's just not as interesting. It's like he can't even have fun with the big action sequence of this. It's like kind of like Flight, if Flight kept replaying it from all these different angles. Flight's more interesting because it's made up and stuff. Sully does as much as it can with that sequence, but some of the sequences are weird, like showing the passengers coming on the plane and then showing like these dad and his two sons who are on a golf trip. I was like, I don't care. Like, show the lady with the baby, show the lady who's there with her mom or something and needs to get a thing from a gift shop. Not very well developed. These characters, I mean, they're just passengers. They're in the thing, they're gone. But just like, it didn't feel like they really understood what to do with the passengers and really set it up and make you care about it, other than being thrilled by the sequence and understanding it from Sully's perspective, which in this film is like mopey and melodramatic and super sad and stuff. And I kind of just wish they had a little more fun with it and it had been a little more interesting and intriguing. And its matter-of-fact way made me go, oh, that is amazing. It is thrilling. It's great that he did his job and he was such a professional and everyone on the crew knew how to do their jobs and get everyone off safely and no one was hurt and they did their job to the best of their ability and everything like that. But it almost plays against the whole idea of this commission who look inept in this film. It's almost like Clint Eastwood's so in love with that perspective, he can't understand that other people are trying to do their jobs as well, and the whole idea and the theory of the movie in itself kind of falls apart. In the end, it just works in kind of like a very self-centered kind of a way, rather than a way that's kind of more nuanced and interesting and saying something about hard work and everything like that. It just says something about hard work, kind of like somebody complaining in a bar about how they do way more than their coworkers. As much as this film has its many faults, I think Eastwood is good at telling a simple, more economically, this isn't a really economical story to be honest, but it's a lot more economical than American Sniper or J. Edgar. I didn't see Jersey Boys. This is a lot leaner for him, and I think this is the kind of story he should be doing. It reminds me of something like Gran Torino, which he references in this film for whatever reason, but that seems to be something Eastwood's better at as a director, and I'd welcome that a lot more. There are problems with it theory-wise. Production, it's not great. The production values are mainly in like hotels and hotel conference rooms and more hotel conference rooms and interview staging areas and walking around New York at night, and it's just like not an amazing film by any stretch of the imagination. But if you're going to see Sully, you'll be fair enough entertained with it and be kind of fine with it overall and be able to leave and go, that was fine, that was nice, and it's really amazing what he did. And maybe that's all Clint Eastwood was asking from this movie. Maybe that's all the audience is asking from this movie, and maybe that's all we really want from it, is just how the story itself presented to the public and through America, that something good could happen, and that if people are professional and doing their jobs, something wonderful could happen, and something wonderful did happen. And it kind of gives you that feeling all over again, but on that kind of basic level, not in the more nuanced level of like actually hearing the news story or anything. So on that level, I think it is a good enough movie, and it does a good job despite all of its flaws, come together to a very watchable and probably one of the better Clint Eastwood movies, at least in this part of the 2000s, and kind of gives you a very watchable but very melodramatic and mopey look at one of recent history's more headline-grabbing incidences that didn't end in a tragedy or a controversy, and everything ended up okay by showing you the controversy that was involved in it that you didn't really realize, thus semi-ruining it, but it kind of works out in an entertaining way, so we should just be probably fine with it. So if you have seen Sully and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.